Good morning, friends. July 27th, Tuesday, the 18th of. We're studying the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. Presently, we are studying Maseches Shabbos, chapter 6. We're on 65a, soon to be 65b, Samach Hey Amud Aleph, turning the page to Samach Hey Amud Beis. If today works out right, we may study the entire Mishnah, and by the end of today, we'll hopefully be up to the next Mishnah. Some interesting discussions along the way. I want to thank everybody for being here. And for those that will be joining us in the future, watching the recording, welcome as well. Today's learning, we're going to dedicate the schus, the refuah shlema for Borislav ben Chaya and Lior ben Sarah, two Jews among many that need a refuah shlema. I will share with you that I spoke to the mother of the Borislav ben Chaya, the young man that I said was in a coma, unfortunately, after some kind of violent circumstances, and she tells me there's been a slight improvement, and she's certain that it's the davening and the learning with chusai, so we'll keep it up and maybe have more good news. Let's share the screen and get on our way. So we studied a Mishnah yesterday, which was a bunch of stuff that is not quite accessories, but had other functions, other needs, and surprisingly, perhaps, a number of these items are permissible. And so today we're going to do the Gemara's analysis and this explanation of this Gemara. And we're going to see some very interesting items along the way. So starting off, the Gemara talks about the ability, the right on Shabbos to apply a stone to an injury. A coin to an injury. And yesterday, at Beryl, we only had one pharmacist on duty, if I recall at this point. So we were a little bit at a disadvantage, although Rebellin.
Since you were talking about coins, you were short of change.
Oh, let's flip that scale and we'll go back to our former.
Give no quarter.
Oh. So we spoke about the possibility of placing a coin on an injury. Now, many thoughts come to mind when you talk about placing a coin on a wound. Infection is one of those things that I might wonder, putting a coin, that's had many people handle it. I think coins are not known for being particularly sterile. But anyways, why? Right? So, but why might one place a coin? So we theorized as we studied the Mishnah different possibilities. Dr. Hammer suggested it may have been like a splint. Others talked about the possibility of the healing properties of metal. Someone else suggested that maybe it simply provided it was a hard substance that could provide protection. So now the Gemara is going to ask what the malady is and also what might be the value of the coin. So now let's see the Gemara's take. My sinis, the Gemara asks, what is this sinis? What is this illness, this malady, this wound that the Mishnah indicates one may place a coin? So the Gemara says, Bas Ara, the part of the foot that faces towards the ground. Rashi Makashi Tachas Parsas Haregel. It's the bottom part of the foot, the sole of the foot. This is a layup, Rebberal. Give us a sole.
Yeah, perfect for this week's Sedra.
Huh?
The sole.
Akev.
Oh, Rebberal is on the ball. Shkoyach. You see, I knew we had to give you that.
He's on the Yakev.
We had to pass the ball to him. All right. So on the bottom of the foot, not quite the heel, close enough. And what would happen, says Rashi, is v'koisher basela l'refuah. There was a way that they would tie the coin on the foot, and it was meant to provide refuah. Okay. Why a stone? I'm sorry. Why a coin? So that's the Gemara's question. Umay shna sela. Why do we need a coin? Ilema kol midida kosha malila. If the value, the point of the coin is that it is very hard, kol midida kosha malila, anything that is strong, kasha, should protect. So therefore, levad lo chaspa, therefore, why don't you use earthenware if all you need is the hardness of it? Well, then you could find earthenware that's equally hard and could either put pressure or protection on the injury. So the Gemara says, therefore, there must be another point. Elo mishum shuchta. Maybe the point of the coin is because of shuchta. Let's see Rashi. First of all, dakusha, shukasha. It's hard. Umagin al maka, and it protects the injury. Mikoitzim. You say this, Rachim. So Rashi has a very interesting take. I'm certain that others have a different understanding of this. Rashi says you place a coin on your foot, not to heal your foot, but to protect your foot from further irritation. If you ever try walking barefoot, you could do it. But if you have a cut or a blister or an injury on your foot, that makes it very difficult to walk barefoot. I'm not saying you should or shouldn't walk barefoot anyways, but you certainly want to have something protecting your foot. Something that's going to keep something sharp and pointy and that's going to irritate your foot. So you might put a very hard piece of metal over the injury, and now your injury will only be irritated by the metal of the coin, but nothing will be able to poke into it, and it'll stay as clean as possible. And I don't suppose a Band-Aid was available, and also probably wouldn't quite do the trick if you're walking into thorns and other hazards of the road. So Rashi understands this to be less to heal and more to protect. We'll read Rabbi Steinsaltz's explanation in a moment, but this is what Rashi seems to be saying. Okay, so then the Gemara says maybe the reason why you need a coin and not a piece of earthenware is because of shuchta. What's shuchta? So we'll read how Rashi explains it, and we'll see how Rabbi Steinsaltz translates it. Lachluchis hayotzem and akesef. Lichluchis, the moisture, something that comes out of the metal, the silver. Uvelaz royal, and in French it's called royal, which reminds me. Oh, we have our Oitzer Lazi Rashi, who says that Rudil is rust. The Yafalamaka Shuchta Kimoi, the Shas of Tzedel. Anyways, Rashi explains that somehow, surprisingly enough, rust was considered to be good for an injury. We have any physicians on call over here? Today, would we understand rust to be good for an injury? Lav dafka, as we say, not necessarily. So I'm not certain if this is literally rust or some other kind of metal something. But anyways, it seems like from Rabbi Steinsaltz and from this word that Rashi shares with us from Old French that it means rust. The rust was good for the injury. We're just don't we understand there to be an association between tetanus and rust? No? Okay.
That's interesting that the color of rust and the color of iodine are the same.
Interesting. So therefore the Gemara says, because you also need the rust, it needs to be a coin. So the Gemara says, hold on, levad lo tasa, now we could use like a metal plate, a metal tray. Elamishim surta, it also probably needs the kind of form, the image of the coin. What would be the purpose of the image of the coin? Let's see, we'll see in a moment. So the Gemara says, levad lo psula, pulsa. So then make a kind of coin that's not actually currency, but it has an imprint in it. From here we understand that what a person needs for their foot when they have this injury is not one of these factors, not that it's hard alone, or not that it's rusty alone, or not that it needs all of these factors together, and all of these different issues, being hard and rust and the engraved and the way it's engraved and etc. All of those things equal to us needing a coin and nothing else. Let's see Rashi, and then I want to read Rabbi Steinsaltz's explanation. Levitosa, the chaspa, a plate of silver. If it's not the issue of the rust, well, then you just need the image. You can do it on a plate. Pulsa would not be a actual coin, says Rashi. It would be like a model, just the same design as a coin, but without the value of it, without metal.
They're not answering the question. Why a sella? If it would say a coin, any coin would make sense.
This is what the Gemara is answering. That the sella has the right size, the right hardness, the right engravings that make. Well, you'll see in a moment why you'd want to have any kind of disparity in the, how do you call it? Why it's just a flat piece of metal. Why does the Mishnah use the word sela and not metal or something hard? Basically, the three things that are beneficial when a person has an injury on the bottom of their foot, being hard, and the rust, and its form, all three together are primarily and most easily found in a coin, and therefore the Mishnah discusses a coin. So Rashi, it seems to say it's some kind of injury on the bottom of the foot. I mean, not Rashi. The Gemara says it's something on the bottom of the foot. Rashi explains that you're protecting an open wound. Rabbi Steinsaltz says that a tzinis, or tzinit, is either inflamed swelling or a callus on the sole of the foot. The coin was there to prevent rubbing, irritation, and he says it's also conceivable that contact with metal will heal the wound. And he says, actually we read this yesterday, but it's good to read again. Nowadays, various metal-based powders are used to heal wounds. Reb Beryl, have you ever, I don't want to say prescribed, I don't think you prescribed.
I know that they use gold injection for rheumatism and arthritis, but I think it's been discounted.
But it's conceivable that there might be some value.
Yeah, for sure.
According to certain medical. Now, what exactly would be the benefit of a coin? So the Meiri is quoted here as explaining as follows. You know, our coins today are minted on both sides. But maybe certain coins, maybe discount coins or mints that were not so evolved, would have only an image on one side, and so the impression would be on one side, and and it would pop out on the other side. And so the Meiri says that the depression where the coin pokes out gives a little more space for the wound to expand beyond the flatness of the coin. That's a possible. So anyways, there you have it. This is our Mishnah, why it uses a coin, because all of the different stuffs collectively create the appropriate protection and even a little healing for an injury on the bottom of the foot.
And we're not worried that the coin is going to fall off and she's going to pick it up?
We are not worried that the coin is going to fall off, because it seems like it would have to be secured, because if it wasn't secured, it wouldn't start out on your foot, right? Certain things, like you put in your ear, it's not going to immediately fall off. A coin doesn't stand a chance unless it's properly secured. So the issue here, we're not worried about it falling off per se, but the question is it like you're carrying around the coin? Because if it's attached to your foot, ultimately you're carrying it around, and our Mishnah teaches us that that is acceptable. It's not considered carrying the coin. Now here's where things get interesting. The next segment of the Mishnah talks about how they would have a string in their ear to keep the piercing open. And if you recall yesterday, we read Rashi, and Rashi says it's to keep the pierced ears, or the piercing, from closing up. And we saw that there are other Rishonim that understood it to be talking about other decorative strings. And then the distinction is going to be minor children and adults, where we said that adults might take it off to go to the mikvah, so maybe children would not have to take it off. This was the two ways this Gemara was learned. Ultimately, we're going to understand the first way, which is that these are strings that are there to hold the ear piercing from closing. So, a girl may go out on Shabbos with these strings. Avua de Shmuel, Shmuel, who was one of the great rabbis of the Gemara, he had a father. You know, every person has a father if they exist, or at least until, I don't know, thus far, every person has a father. They might know who the father is, but there's a father. So the great Shmuel also had a father. He was another Talmud Chacham, and he's occasionally quoted in the Gemara as Avua de Shmuel. And there's a discussion, why would we call him Shmuel's father? Why don't we just call him whatever his name is? So, okay, here he doesn't really give an explanation, but he references that it's possible that Shmuel became so great and well known that his claim to fame, he said, no, I'm Shmuel's father. And he was proud of it. So that's a nice thing. But anyways, he was a Talmud Chacham, and according to the dictionary or that we provide over here, he was a judge in Arda. And although his son's reputation surpassed him, but he was very great. He interacted with Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, so he was the very first generation of the Mishnah, highly respected. And we have a lot of different halacha brought from him. And he was a father who was engaged in his children's lifestyle and education. And this is something that fathers used to do. They used to get involved in their kids' lives. And so let's see what interesting things he permitted or didn't permit his daughters to do. So although it was common for girls to be allowed halachically to have these strings in their ears and it would keep the piercings open, he would not permit his daughters to do so. And Rashi lets us know that the Gemara is going to explain what the problem was. He did not allow them to share a bed in their childhood or before they were married, in their single days. In those days, I think until more recent times, where there wasn't always a lot of prosperity. Many times, if you had a bed, you didn't have a lot of beds, so you had one section designated for sleeping, and so all the kids would sleep in one bed. I think there are many people that have shared that was part of their life at certain points, especially first generation immigrants that perhaps came after difficult times. You'll hear that this is not an uncommon occurrence, and it wasn't uncommon then, but he didn't allow his kids to all sleep in one bed. He made ritual baths. He would have them go to the mikvah in Nisan, and mats and mats to allow them to go into the mikvah in Tishrei. And Rabbi Steinsaltz right away says because the water was shallow, the riverbed was muddy, he made it so that they could go into the mikvah comfortably. Rashi, mikvah is b'yom Nisan. He would make a mikvah. Why would he make a mikvah in Nisan? Rashi says, shamayim mechunasim. He would actually build a mikvah or provide a mikvah of gathered water. Or he would have a mikvah, a pool near the river, and he would draw the water from the river, and he would have a mikvah. And in the winter, he would put mats on the ground, and they would be able to go to the mikvah in the river. So the Euphrates, they would go in the Euphrates in the Tishrei, and they would go into another mikvah in Nisan. Reb Beryl, yes?
Why are we being told this? What's the relevance?
The whole relevance is the first line, which is that he didn't let his kids have those strings. But because we're going to discuss the laws of the strings, and because Shmuel had a specific reason not to permit his kids to do it, even though most opinions say that you could, we bring the whole citation, which includes other items which are not immediately related to our subject at hand and are yet going to trigger some interesting discussions along the way. Dr. Hammer, I hit mute also. Please unmute so we can hear your voice. Oh, I'm sorry. I just muted you again, trying to invite you to unmute. Go ahead.
What's interesting is it appears that he decided to have a different expectation for his daughters or his children. Mm-hmm. And therefore, I'm not going to treat you like a kid. I'm going to treat you like an adult or at least an adolescent. And mm-hmm. therefore, you're not going to sleep together in another bed with your sisters. And I doubt if people were young children were being taken then to go to the mikveh. And, and I'm not going to let you with this narishkeit of piercing your ears and having strings in it and all of that. So it's just sort of interesting.
Doctor, it's very interesting that you're sharing that because I didn't immediately see it that way, but you make a very strong point that it sounds like he's treating them like adults. Again, that's not how I understood it, and that's not how Rashi seems to explain it.
That's what I'm saying. And
very interesting.
Sure, just to go on for a moment, if nobody comments on that, then there's a sort of acceptance that the parent has a right to do that. Everybody has a right to bring up the children who they want, but that it was acceptable to do that, which, is just sort of interesting, and I think potentially not very healthy for children who fall into that category.
So I'm not sure if that's how I would interpret it. What I'd certainly say is that it sounds like Shmuel told his kids, listen, I know the other kids in the neighborhood could do X, Y, and Z, but this is how we do it in our family. This is how it's going to go.
Right.
And so I didn't read, but now that you say it, that
Yeah.
there's a strong case to be made. And again, he's not letting them do this childish strings in their
Right.
ears, and he's
To add what Bernie says, don't forget that Nara at a certain age would already maybe be ready for marriage and engagement, and at a younger age than we think of today.
Mm-hmm. But this certainly brings up some interesting questions and important questions. And why would he want them to go to the mikveh? So we associate today mikveh with marriage or intimacy, because halachically a Jewish man and woman are not allowed to be intimate unless she is pure, has gone to the mikveh following a menstrual cycle. So that's why a kala before the wedding goes to the mikveh, and a married woman in an Orthodox traditional home goes to the mikveh, possibly on a monthly basis, depending on their cycle. And so is that what's going on over here?
Maybe he was just teaching them because he made the ritual baths. He didn't take them to a mikveh. Maybe he was preparing.
By the way, I'm not reading here that he literally took them to the mikveh. He instructed and provided for them to go to the mikveh, just to make that clear.
Yeah, he sort of made a sort of kind of mikveh.
He facilitated their ability to go to the mikveh. Why?
He's training them.
Why would he want?
Is, where's the mother?
That's a very good question. So,
well, also, I'm sorry for interrupting, but I don't want to get into it, but too much. But as you said, we all know, particularly in Europe, and people new immigrants here, who didn't have money for multiple bedrooms, and that kids slept together. Now, we're not even talking here about brothers and sisters. He didn't let his daughters. Right. So
the Gemara, by the way, the Gemara is going to explain each of these lines. I'm enjoying the it's good to challenge our own thoughts and then to see how the Gemara, and the Gemara is not going to answer all of our questions, obviously. But so these are three things that he had his children do. As I mentioned, parents once upon a time were allowed to instruct their children with how they should live their lives while they were in their homes. Again, remembering that kids left their parents' homes at a pretty young age too. So that's that. So just Rashi explains that these items, at least the one about them sleeping, was when they were still single. I'm not absolutely certain when it says that he made mikvahs for them, if it means in their maybe once they were married, but not, but still depending on their father for guidance. He was a great dayan and rav and leader, and probably affluent too, and so they were able to lean on him for guidance and their direction. It's also possible, again, I'm sure it's discussed, I just haven't, in my search, I haven't found the exact, now that I'm learning this now, I haven't seen this. Is it because of marriage and intimacy, as we said, or is it because, although today we don't keep Tum and Tara beyond mikvah for marital purposes or spiritual purposes, perhaps those that were extra from yet maintained a certain degree of Tara, of purity in their lifestyle, and therefore maybe he wanted to go to the mikvah because that was the ideal in Judaism then, that a person should be pure. They would have taharas, things that were maintained pure, food that was maintained with purity. So I'm not exactly certain what his concern was. If Rabbi, it was, my suspicion is that it has more to do with the tahara of foods that we read about in the biblical and immediately post-biblical era than a discussion about intimacy. That's my understanding.
Rabbi,
Yes.
are we to presume that because this is quoted, that this is unusual?
Yeah, it's absolutely clear that this was not prevalent for everybody.
Right,
Yes.
right.
It wasn't like he insisted on all the people of his town. He was the dayan, he was the leader. He didn't insist on that. This was a special chumrah that he insisted on for his family. All right, so let's see the Gemara's analysis, and then we'll be able to discuss a little. Doctor, go ahead.
This one, getting back to the strings, okay?
Yes.
We understand that it's common for girls to pierce their ears, but is it possible? And you don't have to put in a string, put in a metal something.
Right.
It's possible that this fellow was against that for halachic reasons about piercing, that didn't believe.
I don't get that impression because of the next line in the Gemara. Otherwise, I would wonder that too.
Okay.
So let's see what his problem with those strings were.
Right.
Why didn't he let his daughters wear these strands? The Anantanan, we've learned the Mishnah. We know it says that girls are allowed to go out wearing these strings. And Rashi, at least the way Rashi explains it, it's talking about in the ears. These girls, because they came from a privileged home, they didn't have just any plain old boring string in their ears. They had really beautiful strings. And so on Shabbos, he said, you guys have to take these out because otherwise you're going to want to show them off. And if you take them out of here to show them off, you'll end up carrying them. So in a sense, we might say he's checking their privilege. He's reminding them that with privilege come additional responsibilities or restrictions. And so on Shabbos, he didn't allow them to have these strings in their ears. So an interesting...
Hold on.
And just to show you how important this Gemara is, here we opened up the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch in the very subject that we're discussing in our Mishnah, and says like this: Habanos, Ktanos, young girls, shenoikvin oznehem, who pierce their ears, kadei laseis behem nizomim kisha yigdalu, and they want to be able to wear jewelry when they get older, and someone's buying them jewelry. Muter laseis behem. You're allowed to walk around with these things in your ears. And similarly, if you string through a little bit of thread or some kind of earring that was a band or something, you're allowed to carry it. If they aren't colored. If they're very beautiful and colored, also you cannot wear them. Why? Because of our Gemara that explains that it's not really that Shmuel was being more exacting on his daughters in this regards. It was more that there was something unique about the strings they had in their ears, and therefore Shmuel insisted that they follow the halacha, which was the more beautiful, colorful strings are more prone to being removed to show them off. Let's see if the Rambam says the same.
Looks like this guy was an overprotective father.
Maybe he was just a father who knew the halacha and he wanted his kids to live a devout Jewish life.
What do you have to
I
Let's
guess-
let's just see the Mishnah Torah for a second. We'll get back to this. The Rambam as well says, Yoitza isha v'chutin shabitzavara mepnei she'ena chinakes atzma ve'ena chaytzisim ve'ima yitzvoim asum shematiris l'chaverta. Rambam apparently learns, like I quoted to you yesterday, other mefarshim who understand that these strings were not in the ears, like Rashi says, like the Shulchan Aruch learns from Rashi. Rather, the Rambam understands that these were other kinds of bands that girls would wear, perhaps on their neck. And if they were colorful, the Rambam says they too oughtn't to be worn because they're prone to removal. Because you want to show off to you want to show them to your friends. So item number one was Shmuel being more from, not allowing his daughters to have these things in their ears. It's not quite the way it seems. Simply because they lived a better life. That's my interpretation. Because they had fancier strings in their ears, Shmuel said, you guys are going to end up wanting to show these off. They're special. They're unique. Your friends are like, can I see those? I've never seen a earring, like that. And so therefore he understood and he taught, and this is ultimately brought in halacha. So it wouldn't have been exclusively for Shmuel's daughters, but certainly that's how we learned halacha, that if they're colorful, they should not be worn like that. All right, let's see the next segment, which is also going to bring up a lot of questions. Why would he not let them sleep together? Perhaps this was because of a teaching of Rav Huna. So we're just going to remind everyone that conventional items that are accepted and comfortable in society are not necessarily, the Gemara is non-conforming to modern sensitivities, and we just have to accept that as we read this. And so this is referring to women who are engaged in same-sex activities.
Right.
And Rav Huna was of the opinion, he was a kohen, that the Torah says that men ought not lay together. Again, we're not here to talk about the morals of it, just the halacha as it's presented in the Torah and in the Gemara. The Torah does not explicitly talk about women. And yet, Rav Huna said that too would be problematic because it would cause such a woman to not be allowed to marry a kohen. Rashi psulis lekuna. L'kohen gadol lehavi b'sula shnei modaf agav l'kohen gadol b'yemi lehava hayel v'derech zinus chashul alav arechar. Basically, because being involved in such sexual activity prior to marriage might classify someone as a zoina, therefore they would possibly be disqualified to a kohen who's not meant to marry someone who engaged in non-halachic sexual activity. This is what Rav Huna's opinion was, and the Gemara is saying maybe this is what was bothering or concerning Shmuel. He was afraid that his daughters could come to engage in such a manner, and therefore he wanted to prevent it. The Gemara doesn't accept this. The Gemara says no. Look, he was not actually concerned of this activity with his daughters. He was just afraid of conditioning, so they don't become used to sleeping with other individuals, which could eventually lead them to being comfortable and getting into trouble. That was his understanding. And so Rashi understands that they want to be intimate with a man, and he wanted them to get married first, and then let them be involved in intimate life. So this is what he was doing. He was trying to keep them pure and keep them away from thinking about lying with other people. We can discuss, and we have people that are professionals in psychology, and we could discuss if it is a belief that this would be helpful or not helpful. And in general, there's always a discussion of certain measures to try to keep someone away from something could boomerang or could have the opposite effect. But this is what Shmuel did, and this is why he did it. Dr. Hammer, go ahead.
Nobody differentiates between a 3-year-old and a 13-year-old.
Correct. Here we're not differentiating between a really young child and an older child. My understanding, based on the other items, is we're not talking about a very young child. We're talking about girls in their adolescence and beyond. That's how I understand it. Is that correct? Doctor, you asked a good question. It doesn't explicitly tell us how old they were. And so my assumption is as good as, well, I'll tell you why. Because the word banot, if there's a little child, you might use the word yalda, a young child. Banot usually means older girls. But
also the phrase "they went out." 3-year-olds are not going out anywhere.
3-year-olds are probably, that's how I understood it. But it doesn't say explicitly anywhere. So I wanted to acknowledge the doctor asked a good question. My understanding is we're talking about girls that are coming of age, if you will, and that's why he's
prepubescent.
Prepubescent. All right. The doctor has spoken.
Yes.
And that is item number 2. He was trying to protect them, preserve their innocence, and so he didn't want them sleeping together. Not that he was afraid of what his kids would do with one another, but he was afraid that it would trigger thoughts, and then they'll be where he was trying to keep them from to preserve their innocence. Certainly a noble sentiment, not something that you're going to put up signs in the community or get up in shul and tell the parents that are struggling to survive that you have to get every kid their own bed. No, but in his own household, he was able to do it. He did it, and that is how he ran his home. And as mentioned, he was able to instruct his household how to manage well in the home. Want to do something different? Go get your own house.
It gives you a very good picture of that family, because you could see that the daughters are they're at least 14 years old or so.
I would ask Dr. Hammer if prepubescent means 14 or a little younger than that.
Younger.
I don't think they were
Younger.
I think they were older. Because it's, and I don't think he wants them to wear this fancy jewelry because
No.
it'll attract the men.
On the contrary. First of all, it doesn't say anywhere that he's afraid of attracting men. There's three separate items that he's trying to help his kids stay halachically compliant. Item A, which is the most relevant, is the ears. Because they have these very colorful bands, he's not afraid of them attracting attention. He lets them wear it 6 days a week. When they come home for Shabbos and they put on their Shabbos dresses, he said, okay, girls, time to deposit your ear strings because you might carry them on Shabbos. So it's not a matter of attracting attention. It was a matter of instructing them in the ways of observing Shabbos. Number two, he was able to do so and he wanted to keep them innocent, and he was afraid that they'll get comfortable to sharing a bed, and then in their innocence, they could end up sharing a bed with someone else. That's not how. And so he said to keep away from trouble, to create safeguards, to prevent trouble from arising. That was his rule. You want to know, did he send his kids to sleepaway camp or not? I don't know. Maybe he would be hesitant to send his kid to sleepaway camp. It could be. It doesn't say that here in the Gemara.
Rabbi, how did we move from Shmuel to Shmuel's father?
No, we've only been talking about Shmuel's father. For now. We're going to talk about Shmuel soon. But for now, we've only been talking about Shmuel's father and his daughters, Shmuel's sisters. And Roberto, by the way, you asked a good question. I'm not going to answer it, but you asked the question, what about the wife? Where's the wife in all this? Why is he only instructing his daughters about the mikveh?
So therefore, the daughters are actually Shmuel's sisters then.
Correct. These are Shmuel's sisters. I don't know if they're whole sisters or half sisters, but they were certainly his sisters, yes. It's fairly certain that Avua, the Shmuel's daughters, were Shmuel's sisters. Right? It would be a good riddle, who was the famous brother of the daughters of Avua the Shmuel? All right, let's see the Gemara further. Why would he make a mikvah? Why would he build a mikvah for them? Why did he not let them toivel in the river, which was common practice back then? This would indicate that Avua the Shmuel's father, paskin like Rav. How so? Rav had an opinion about the validity of using the Euphrates as a mikvah certain times of year. Here's what he said. Mitra b'marava, if it rains or when it rains in the west, we understand the west to mean Israel, but it means Israel in that whole region. Sadarava pras, the Euphrates becomes very swollen with water. Why do rivers occasionally swell or shrink? What's the word for a river? They get smaller. Dry up, but not dry out, but dry up. Why does it become smaller? Well, Rabbah says it's associated with the rainfall to the north. Help me out with my map.
West.
To the west. So anyways,
West
the river, when it rains in Israel.
Babel is east.
Okay, so when it rains in the west, all right, when it rains in the west, that water ends up flowing into the river to the Euphrates, and so the swelling of the Euphrates is associated with rainwater. What's wrong with rainwater? A river could be a kosher mikvah, but rainwater has its own halachic parameters. As we know, mikvahs today, which are mostly of rainwater, have to be still. So much so, if there's a hole in the mikvah and water is dripping, it could disqualify it. If the filter is on and it's causing the water to move around, it could be a problem. Rivers can flow and they're kosher for a mikvah. Rainwater needs to be stationary. If your river is full of rainwater, according to Rav, and apparently according to Avua the Shmuel, such a mikvah would be disqualified as a mikvah. So therefore, he wants his daughters to toivel, or maybe he didn't want his daughters to toivel. Maybe all the girls in that community toiveled. He was a protective father, and he understood as the dayan that the mikvah, the river that all the girls go to, was not kosher to be a mikvah in the month of Nisan, and therefore he constructed a mikvah, an alternative for his kids. You see, it could be that it doesn't say that he instructed his kids to go to mikvah. It seems like all the kids went to mikvah. Why would all the kids go to mikvah? Probably because in those days they still adhered to the laws of Tumah and Tara, the purity and impurity. And so therefore he'd want them to go to the mikvah. He just made sure they were taken care of. And being that he felt that the river, when it was swelling with water, and that it was rainwater, is disqualified, therefore he built them a mikvah alternative. Rashi, Sada Rabba Paras Meyid Bidavar. The Euphrates testifies regarding the rain to the west. Shoyayid Meretz Yisrael at Bavel, because the Euphrates, the water would flow down from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel. You're right, it's to the west, to the east. The Gadal Mimei HaGeshamim, and the river swells from rainwater. The Yarden Bnei Bavel Sheyardu Geshamim Bahari Eretz Yisrael. Now the Babylonian Jews, you see, Jews were always strongly connected to Israel. Today we can go online, we can watch a live stream of the Kotel, or we could Zoom with our family in Israel, or we could fly to Israel, usually with Hashem's help soon again. In those days, how would a Babylonian Jew feel connected to Israel? It was very hard to travel. You had to be a real adventurer, an explorer, and have some means to do so. Couldn't have so they look at the rivers, and when the rivers of the south say, wow, look, this is the rain from Eretz Yisrael, and now it's in our rivers, because Bavel was primarily dependent on the river for water.
Rabbi, that's in the news today. There's a big fight between Egypt and that with the water diverting it, because they're on the verge of going to war.
Okay. So you see, our Gemara is at the cutting edge of current events, and we should only have good news for Eretz Yisrael. But anyways, I think this is a beautiful. Again, I'm giving a little bit of so they look at the rivers and say, "Wow, this is Israeli rain," and they would know that it was raining in Eretz Yisrael. V'smeichem alachayim, and they'd be happy for their brothers because Israel's agriculture depended on rain. This is a beautiful Rashi. We should highlight it at least, if not cut it out and put it on the refrigerator. This is beautiful. Shmuel's father agreed with Rav. So it's a positive thing, except according to Avuad de Shmuel, the rainwater, which is awesome and exciting and wonderful, also makes the river not a good mikvah. He's afraid that there's more rain than the water that's naturally flowing. And the Mishnah in Mikvahs, which teaches the laws of mikvah, says, Zoichelin Kemayin, Vanoitvin Kemikvah. There's kind of Achmain, Bar Mikvah, Mayim, Yachal, Mela, Kazayasa, Mikvah, Metchila, Yatar, Tamalim, Mayim, Mamayim, Bidei Shamayim, Mat Mikvah, Bidei Shamayim, Imamayim, Matar, Zechel, Mat Mikvah, Matar, Zechel. Basically, the Mishnah draws different important contrasts between the kashrus of a spring, of a river, versus a mikvah, which is of rainwater. And because the river works only because of natural flowing water, if it's overpowered by rainwater, it could become disqualified. And that's why he built a mikvah. Upliga de Shmuel. Reb Beryl, you asked what happened to Shmuel? So Shmuel comes back in the picture to disagree with his father. Okay, really, Rav and Shmuel disagree, but by extension, Shmuel's disagreeing with his father. Pliga de Shmuel. Rav disagrees with Shmuel. Amar Shmuel nara mi kefe mivarech. Rivers become bigger because of underground sources of water. Rashi, mi kipe mivarech. Misvasai umimkairai umisaloi. From its source. And from the underground sources. So where is the water of the river coming from according to Shmuel? Not from Israel, not from anywhere. Then the water naturally comes up from its source. I don't think he's saying that it might not be connected to rainwater. I think he's just saying that we don't look at this water. This is my apologetics over here. I think what he's saying is we don't view this as rainwater, because for rainwater to get into the river, it doesn't fall into the river. It gets absorbed into the underground channels, and the way it's contributed is more of a natural, and it's considered river water, not rainwater that's diluting and disqualifying the mikvah. Rashi.
Rabbi,
Yes.
Isn't rainwater an integral part of a mikvah?
So yes. So just to clarify again, there's different kinds of mikvahs. Today, when we say mikvah, we mean a structure that has a very, very precisely and halachically engineered pool that's full of rainwater. That's what we mean when we say mikvah. That pool has many criteria, how it's constructed, how the water gets there, how it's managed, how it's cleaned, etc., etc. That's a mikveh, the rainwater. Hypothetically, there are certain other ways that a person could toivel, but it's not advisable. A person could choose to dip in a well or in a spring or in a river. It's a lot safer to go to a mikveh, and it's a lot more comfortable and sanitary. And also, many people have issues with going outside in the elements and getting undressed and going into a freezing cold or exposed space. So a mikveh is a safe way to go to the mikveh. So there's two kinds of mikvahs. It could be a river. It could be rainwater. When it's rainwater, it needs to be entirely still and in this mikveh. When it's a river, it needs to be a flowing river or a spring that's flowing.
An ocean.
You can't mix, and an ocean possibly too. But you can't mix the two. You can't have a flowing rainwater. That would be disqualified for mikveh. It has to be stationary. And so therefore, if the river, which is meant to flow, is more rainwater than natural river water, that, according to some, is considered disqualified. Who considers it disqualified? Abu the Shmuel did. Rav Meir as well.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Rabbi, why did you say possibly an ocean? Why not definitely?
Okay, in ocean. I just didn't want to get into the, but yes, I just wanted to leave it. But yes, in ocean is used as a mikveh. People call me, they say, Rabbi, where's the closest mikveh? I said, you want the closest mikveh or the mikveh that's,
Right.
I said, we have one of the biggest mikvahs
Right.
right out your window.
Right.
But please behave accordingly, or you might find yourself in a
movie.
I don't know, a movie, but temporary police custody. So, so Shmuel is disagreeing about the nature of the rainwater. This statement also comes to be contradictory between another statement he made. Damar Shmuel himself once paskined, Ein hamayim itarim b'zoyechalim. Water can only purify ela paras, only in the Euphrates, b'mei Tishrei bilvad, only in the days of Tishrei. Why? Since rain does not fall in the summer, it's only then that the water there is actually a river. So ironically, Shmuel on one hand here says that the river gets water from natural sources, not rain. But on the other hand, he elsewhere said that you can't use the river except at a time where it's absolutely clear that there's no rain. Rashi. No, this is an earlier Rashi. Elaparos. Basically, he says that the rainwater needs to be captured in a pool, like we explained, like we understand the mikveh to be. Basically, the Torah talks about that a person can toivel in a spring. A spring is water that comes up from the earth. A river, halachically, is considered to be a body of water that's spring water, unless it's diluted by rainwater. And so Rashi is explaining is that Shmuel is of the opinion, like his father, that the river can be diluted by rainwater. So this concludes our analysis of the three areas where Shmuel's father instructed his daughters. Superficially, it looks like he was a very overbearing, demanding father. Some of our esteemed Chachamim may yet believe that to be the case. But I think following our analysis, he was a father who was involved in his children's education and lifestyle. He was highly educated in the Jewish law. He was aware of their privilege. And therefore, because of their privilege, there were additional halachic considerations. It would be like if we were to say, trying to think who to pick on. Dr. Hammer didn't let his young children drive after it got dark outside. So we hear that statement thinking, wow, Dr. Hammer was a terribly oppressive parent. He was telling his kids when to drive and when not to drive. But then we'll study and we'll find out, many of Dr. Hammer's kids' friends didn't have cars at all. So when do you have to make a rule that your kid can't drive at dark? When your kid was given a car. So is he a demanding father or a very giving father? So it just shows you that depending on the rest of the picture, Shmuel's father may have been a very exacting, demanding, and overbearing parent, or he may have actually been a very giving, generous, and loving parent. But because of that, there were additional rules that needed to be adhered to. Reb Beryl.
Rabbi, what do we know in general about the positions of Shmuel and his father in general? Are they Mekel? Are they Kebesh Hillel or Kebesh Shammai?
I think it's a little less clear. A while ago, we did review a little bit of a survey of their positions. But really the question is about Shmuel's father. So let me punt on that one. And we can look at it. So Dr. Hammer, what do you think about my explanation of Shmuel's father?
I mean, you could spin it that way based on some of the information there, but it still shows that he was very controlling, and that they apparently, there's no issue whether or not they went along with it. So I would assume that it started at a very early age, and that's what was expected of them consistently from early on. Tata says, no, that's it, period, end of discussion.
Bernie, that was what I was trying to get at, is what is his general attitude?
Oh, you wanted to know if we could create a general profile of Abu Ad Shmuel as having been a demanding. So we'll have to put that on the list of follow-up. And here's what I think will happen. We spent enough time today. I hope our memories will work. And Mirza Hashem, down the road, we'll meet Abu Ad Shmuel some more. And now we'll pull this out of our back pocket and we'll see if this helps us build a profile, or if our profile is correct or incorrect. Certainly, this is an interesting statement, an interesting presentation of the areas where of Shmuel's, instruction for his children. Yeah. Very interesting. As I said, I thought today's Gemara might be a little interesting to us. We have just 3 minutes left. Just looking if we're gonna have time to. No, we'll have to conclude the Mishnah tomorrow. All right, let's just start this. Okay, the next segment of the Mishnah was Porefes ala Eben. Remember, we talked about how a person could have a cloak that could be closed with a stone, or a nut, or a coin. I think it's like a big button or something, or something that was used to lock the garment in position. The Gemara says, "V'ha'amris reisha porefes." If you recall, our Mishnah seems to repeat itself, but also contradict itself. Initially, the Mishnah said people from Madai, women from media. By the way, if anyone wasn't on yesterday, there was a very interesting section in the Gemara about style and about how do people dress. So this is, the Mishnah says that a woman of media, a Jewish woman, was allowed to do this kind of sealing, closing up the clothing. And then the end of the Mishnah says, you know what? Porefes ala Eben, you're allowed to do these things, but you shouldn't do it before Shabbos. You shouldn't do it on Shabbos. So the Gemara says, "Va'amris reisha porefes." The first Mishnah says no restrictions. Then the Mishnah says there are restrictions. So what's going on? Rashi. Of course, the initial statement of the Mishnah says you're allowed to put on your clothing on Shabbos. So the Reisha says you can do it, no problem. The end of the Mishnah says there's restrictions. Amar Abai explains it's not really a contradiction. Asan limatbeya. We're coming really to create a restriction only for one item. The item, which is a coin. What's wrong with a coin? A coin cannot be carried around. It's muksa. Rashi asan limatbeya de la bar tiltuhu. You can't carry it. Aval even shehuksa lekach roy letiltuhu. A stone, which is purchased or in your wardrobe for the purpose of closing up your garments, that's not muksa. And so the Seifa was really coming just to teach us about a coin. A coin has to be used before Shabbos. But
Rabbi, it's a serious point, because if you look at the blazers, some of the blazers have things very similar, if not real coins, as buttons.
I just want to say this. I believe there's a difference between a coin that was turned into a button. It's attached to the clothing. Then it loses its status as a coin. But here we're talking about you had a kind of something that you just loop in a coin or a stone. And so there it is a coin. Let's read Rabbi Steinsaltz's words, and then we're going to have to finish up tomorrow. The halacha with regards to a coin is the exception, because a coin is set aside from use on Shabbos. One might conclude that it can't be used at all. The chiddush is it can be used if it was employed prior to Shabbos. So asan seifel lematbeya. The second part that says it has to be done before Shabbos is only talking about the coin. The coin is used in your wardrobe before Shabbos, it's fine. Certainly, if the coin is turned into a pendant or a button, so then it's no longer halachically a coin; it's a button, and then there's no problem. So that is. So that's today's Gemara. I want to thank you for joining us. I'm closing up my comments, but last round of comments, Dr. Hammer, b'vakasha.
Speaking of tomorrow,
Yes.
I will be on a plane tomorrow, and for the next 2.5 weeks, I will try, but at a different time. I don't believe that I'll be able to hear everything live. So I'm telling you that there will be one Bernie. There's a lot of responsibility, Reb Beryl. I hope you can handle it.
I'm gonna have to be multifunctional.
Absolutely. Okay.
You have to, because I am going to be on the plane tomorrow as well.
Oh, wow.
Really? Are you heading? Well, maybe I'll see you at which airport you're leaving from.
Fort Lauderdale.
Me too. Okay. So we won't.
I'm going to Connecticut.
Oh, wow.
No. I'm going a lot further away from that.
All right, so that will be different planes.